Yeah.
Right. So, Debajyoti will be presenting today on, first of all, Debajyoti Dan is a faculty at Baliganj Mahavidyalaya, Kolkata. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Um,
Yes.
yeah, Baliganj, Kolkata. The title of the paper they're presenting today is Protean Mimesis of Kali and the Sin
My
Path.
miss. Yeah.
Yeah, Mimesis of Kali and the Sin Pathos of the Secular. Rereading of Rushdie's Shame. Um, it's all yours.
Just give me a minute, please. Okay. So the topic, as pointed out by ma'am, is protean mimesis of Kali and the sympathos of the secular, rereading of Rushdie's Shame. So what I intend to do in this piece is to look at Rushdie's Shame from a very different kind of a point of view, which is post-human point of view, and Lao Tzu's sympathos point of view, which is mimetikos, the point of mimetic, the mimetikos point of view. So the mimetic contagion of violence is cathartic in Rushdie's Shame. Here, Kali is neither an anomaly nor a religious icon or deity, but a Nietzschean irrational violence that moves in the realm of pathology and ideology. She does not purify the absolutism of Islamic State of Raza, but desanitizes it in unconscious. She brings out Nietzsche's idea of self as a dynamite, as well as the mimetic pathos and human vulnerability. Rushdie prepares the ground for the rise of the beast and Kali by suggesting that both the polyvocality of democracy and polytheism of Hinduism have been repressed by Islamic militarism. The mix of repression and religion creates an invisible underground realm, a bizarre collective unconsciousness seething with violence. A Nietzschean Übermensch will rise to pathologically remove the virus of militarian absolutism and Saracen Puritanism and Philistine monotheism, and Zia's mounted Operation Fair Play in 1978 is the political oxymoron as it eventually terminates with Ali Bhutto's hanging in April 1979 and the beginning of Saracen Puritanism. This reign of terror is downloaded in our consciousness through the sympathos of Rushdie, where we see the primal Hobbesian Leviathan coming back with instinctual violence. So what we see here is the characters that Rushdie shows, both in Iskandar, Raza, Zia. We see a shift from a very androcentric worldview to a very non-androcentric worldview. So Rossi Bradotti, in his book Posthuman, states that at the start of it all, there is he, the classical ideal of a man, formulated first by Protagoras as the measure of all things, later renewed in Italian Renaissance as universal model figure, an ideal bodily function which, in keeping with the classical dictum mens sana in corpora sana, doubles up the set of mental, discursive and spiritual values. Now, when we come into this particular text, we see how Kali is not only the other of the man. Instead of saying woman, I would rather say Kali here as not the only other, but this Kali is not what we see in the Hindu deity, the dictum. Rather, here we see Kali in a very protean mimesis of the Hindu Kali. So what we see here is a very interesting phenomenon. And we can find that in this space, what is born is the interrelation with the Kali and the beast that is there. So, drawing upon Haraway and Brad and Staci Alaimo, who coins a corresponding terms transcorporeality to highlight that human body is never separated from the environment. We have to understand that. But always intermeshed with more than human world. So we see that shame takes us to a dangerous dark dynamic of cosmos, as Omar and Raza are punished by the mythic figure, the beast, and the post-human figure of Kali for following and giving orders. So what Rushdie does is to find a kind of a transhuman perspective and enter into a post-human, where Alaimo's bodily nature and science and environment and material self offers a valuable insight into the connection between the materiality of human bodies and the more than human world, asserting that if nature is to matter, we need a more potent, more complex understanding of materiality. Otherwise, the environment will remain in a symbolic sphere as an object of further exploitation and colonization. And therefore, when we see the emergence here is not in the fashion that here Rushdie did in Satanic Verses. For in Satanic Verses and Midnight's Children both, we see the characters. Religion becomes a very interesting and intriguing point. But in Shame, we rather see not completely a religious angle to it, but rather a criticism of militarianism, absolutism, and the repression of the polyvocality of democracy. So what we see here, rather than in Satanic Verses, here he is suggesting that repression creates a horrid backlash. And not surprisingly, religious repression creates a religious or otherworldly backlash. And so the beast as a non-human agentiality of non-negotiating ontological praxis. So in the ontological space, the horophilia, we see that both Iskandar and Raza Haider becomes and Zulfikar, following the image of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, we find that they are not simply otherized. Rather, Sufia Zanovi, who is repressed, oppressed, and suppressed, gets into the ontology of these male characters, and the horophilia creates the idea of male as abject, Christavan abject rather than object. And what we see here again is that potent and political possibilities of the body of Kali. and therefore a kind of obliteration of Raza Haidar's fictional version of late Pakistani authoritarianism. Rushdie's main point is that Iskandar sets up a secular regime which leads to Raza's religious dictatorship. And what we see, the diagnostic mimesis of Kali through the lens of Nidish Latu, whose diagnostic approach to mimesis, I have been guided by the methodology assumption of shifting perspective from personal vulnerability to mimetic sickness. So here, Sufia Zenobi Haider is not a demigod. She is not even a god or a goddess, but somebody who is small, physically frail, internally damaged, as seen in an authoritarian regime. And here we are activating the alternative thinking through across the bodies. The corporeal necessity evoke rich, complex modes of analysis, the travel through the entangled territories of material and discursive, natural and cultural, biological and textual, human and non-human agents, the ecological system, the chemical agents and other actors that take active part in the construction of the society. So instead of finding kind of sympathy with the oppressed, suppressed and repressed, that is the character of Sufia Zenobi, she inverses the power structure in a very Leviathanic manner, in a very Hobbesian manner, in a very brutal Nietzschean dynamite way. She, instead of just, criticizing the male patriarchy, what Rushdie is doing is to bring out the idea that masculinity, or rather toxic masculinity, is as much a shame as it is a pity. Now, why should we feel pity for the one who is strong? Now, the idea of feeling pity for the strong is that strong is itself a biologically handicapped tool. When you see that I am not vulnerable, they are most vulnerable. So there the pathos rise here, not simply on Sufia Zenobi's character, but Sufia Zenobi becoming the dynamite, becoming the Kali, and destroying the entire hegemonic systemological oppression is one of the interesting concepts that I have found here. Now, in one of the writings by the post-humanist scholar Donna Haraway, we see that there is a relationship of self-described and self-inscribed monstrosity, and here the human relation with environment is as important as Kali's relationship with the society, or that is in the shade. And he says, I quote, "Reality is neither the organism nor the environment, neither the subject nor the object, neither the ego nor the non-ego, but rather the occurrence of both. It is absurd to envisage the objectless subject or subjectless object, a world without me and me without the world." So that me here is again a very contested space of identification, and that is where I come to the next idea of sympathos. Why are we so reluctant to release the suppressed potentiality and free ourselves from the constraints to come closer to the non-human world? So the beast here takes us into this non-human world. For Flusser and Beck, it is scientific objectivity that has reduced our recognition or more than human entanglements. So this entanglement that we have here with the human, non-human and post-human in this novel is what Flusser asserts there's a more rationalized picture of our world, more rationalized picture of our world. So very importantly, though the term is responsible for much needed classification of all organisms, so you just cannot call this Kali as a mutation, of the genetically advanced Sophia Zenobi. Sophia Zenobi is biologically transmuted, genetically modeled into a different cyber ontology. No, that's not it. She is not genetically modified when she becomes Kali. She is not any cybernetics. There is no algorithmic code in her genomic code. So why this Kali is necessary? Why? And very importantly, the final chapter is called the Judgment Day. Very interestingly. And this judgment, the word Judgment Day in itself takes us beyond religion, that is a trans-religious idea, because we have it in Christianity, we have in Islam, we have in Hinduism, everywhere. There is this judgment, somebody who's sitting there as a judgment day. But here that judgment is not God. So why Rushdie is not going into God here in either Allah sense or in Jesus sense or in any Hindu sense, because that is why I said this Kali is not a goddess but a mimetic representation of the ideal. So here when we move to the area where we say the entities, and I quote, the entities of the environment. So this environment of Pakistan, which is being related in the text of shame, the entities of the environment are nothing but knots in this web. And we are knots of the same sort. We are linked to these entities. They are there for us, and the entities are related to us. We are there for them. But both the environment and the organism are abstract extrapolation from the actuality of the intertwined relationship. So what we find here is the intertwined relationship that is there. And what we see, that Rushdie suggests another link between repression of Iskandar and Raza, when in his death cell, Iskandar wonders if, to quote, someone is dreaming him. And he asks if someone is God. So God is dreaming him, not he is dreaming God. And then he answers his own question. No, not God, but Raza, the general of whom this cell is one small aspect, who is general, omnipotent, omnivorous. So Raza is dreaming. This is where we enter into the idea that how humanity in per se is being neglected in the conflict of in the conflict between Raza and the society. And what we have here is the defacing and defacting of human body. As Karen Barad talks in Posthumanist materialistic perspective, for Karen Barad, who follows the Deleuze and Guattari's conviction that knowledge should combine three daughters of chaos, it is only through the merger of science, philosophy, and the arts that we can acknowledge the process responsible for the reconfiguration of human nature today. So what human nature we have seen in this text is a kind of a nanotechnology of the atomistic religion and the religious dichotomies. in imagining that Iskandar says, in imagining that Iskandar has made Raza, Iskandar admits to himself that he fostered the condition which allowed Raza to rise to power unchecked by any firm democratic process that he might have put into practice. In this, Rushdie seems fairly accurate, for while Bhutto's Pakistani People's Party started off well, it effectively banned opposition from 1974 to 1977. Its recollection in 1977 was suspicious and much contested, and it followed the familiar authoritarian course with the, quote, imposition of martial law in order to save the country from chaos and disintegration. And this is exactly where the chaos, this is where Rushdie is bringing Kali. Kali is the agent of chaos, somebody who is beyond the body, somebody who is a part of the environment and the part of the biological body. So in the writing, 2007, Meeting the Universe, Holloway, Quantum Physics, and Entangle of Matter and Meaning, with the definite thesis that matter and meaning are not separate elements. So here, the matter of the body and the material of the self is not separate. And to reassert the urgent need of materialistic turn in humanities. While unpacking this argumentation for the theoretical and practical shift from the body to philosophy, from Iskandar to Kali, we refer to the quantum theory and the philosophical consideration to prove that ignorance of the inextricable linkage leads us to the limitation of our reasoning about the world and materiality. Drawing in the methodology of Niels Bohr's empirical findings, the things do not have inherently determinate boundaries and properties, and thus also the words do not inherently determinate the meaning. She develops Kali develops her rational ontology and becoming an ontology of differential mattering in the Raza's ontology. It is important to emphasize the quantum relation to the ontological difference of mattering. Physics is for us only a metaphor, but predominantly the method to articulate how the material world is brought into being in its complexity. So what Donna Haraway, who adopts a diffractive approach while writing and reading, we find out that we invalidate the very concept that man is at the center of the universe. Man is no longer the center or the central part of any universal question, but what we say is peripheral. Humanity, man has changed from being the central to peripheral, and finally we are all vulnerable. And that is why the sympathos is necessary, where a mimetic approach to subject formation does not allow an exclusive understanding of Rushdie's and isolation. And we have the historical debacle of ego here. Shame's peripheral and shabby hero, Umar Khayyam, the non-masculine hero, Umar Khayyam Shakil, is only partly and only peripherally to blame for the rise of the beast. Rushdie's overweight and cowardly version of the great Persian poet shamelessly complies with the dictates of Iskandar and Raza and abandons all professional morality when mesmerizes his female patients so that he can have some highly charged sex with them. He also jumps at the first chance to indulge his Lolita complex by marrying Raza's mentally deficient young daughter, that is, Sufia Zanobi. Although Umar appears to love his child wife Sufia, his attempt to keep her alive through the sedation suggests the repression of his nation's anger, not to mention that of woman. So what we eventually can conclude here, that Rushdie's fierce antagonism to the Zia's dictatorial regime Rushdie's fierce antagonism to Zia's dictatorial Islamic regime of early 1980s let him take this great liberty in depicting life in a very, very different kind of a bizarre fantasy. And what we see, that tyrant being executed, and finally in the Judgment Day, both Raza Haider and all the male compatriots are literally scared out of their shits. Something that is again a very important aspect, that where rationality is finally dissolved. We have finally the agential realism, the theory of material dimensions of regulatory apparatus in the terms of materiality of phenomena is finally dissolved when Sufia Zenobi becomes Kali. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debajyoti. So this is a good time for both the panelists to also discuss if something came up for them, and other participants here, other listeners also throw in some comments and about these wonderful presentations that they've had. Yeah.
Debajyoti, if I can call you that.
Yes, definitely.
It was very interesting to listen to your paper, because even though we are coming at it from very different perspectives, we are very much aligned in the general sort of theoretical and also literary connections that both of us are trying to make. I really thought it was interesting that you were talking about transhumanism, but also that and I took notes, that's why I was like, you were talking about transcorporeality, right? And you said that leads to a much more sort of dynamic analysis that's there. And I think that is one of the most important concepts in terms of even what I was talking of, that self or the other, where we sort of entrenched in extremes and absolutism is what leads to that kind of chaotic mess that we are seeing, right? So I think, so I thought it was a really interesting point that you made.
Yeah, and actually, yes, as you were talking about the other, and I was feeling like when I was hearing your lecture that, okay, fine, this is a good standpoint to leap up from, because, this otherization has always haunted us, this ontological path. Like we are, however much we are individuals, we cannot be separate from our environment. Like if you are in Pakistan, if you have to have that environmentalism giving you that focus. If you are in India, you are having to that ideological crisis. And even in states, like the violence that has increased over the Europe, be it in France, who is supposed to be the first world country, going through the entire the debacle that was there, people burning each other. A few years back, it happened in England. So the first world countries, forget about what is happening in Ukraine and Russia and Palestine and Israel. That is there always. It's a very contested spot. It has always been there. But imagine the first world countries are into this. So this otherization, the link to the otherization and the environmental effect into the entire human parapsychological and dimensionality of it. Like the West is supposed never to have meddled into this. They have created the concept of other, and now they are haunted by the other. So if you go back to the Algerian war in France, just imagine, the president coming out and says that, okay, all the Algerians need to leave. And even people like Albert Camus could just say, okay, shoot the Arabs because the light is on my eyes. And, and it becomes a novel called Étrangère. However, brilliantly, it is about the alienation. At the end of the day, the othering is the biggest problem that we are facing. And it has moved from the the third world country, second world country, and now into the first world country. People are burning people with whites. The idea of apartheid, which was supposed to have been forgotten, is basically something which has always been there into the mind. And this racial prejudices, gender prejudices, religious prejudices has only increased, taking us into a very extreme level of transcorporeality, where we had to actually burn the signifier. Our body has become the signifier, that we have to burn this body or bury this body in order to attain a post-human, or rather a post Christ, away from the crisis. And that is what I felt your sociological inputs and the classroom factor was so very intriguing. I am very intrigued about your the way you presented the entire the humanity classroom, and the very interesting paradigm shifts that we are into that.
Yeah, I think the ontological point is very important, because a lot of times we talk about borders in just such physical and geographical location spaces, right? And what we are seeing across the world is kind of a focus and centering on that physicality. But there has to be a recognition that there is a much sort of stronger ontological presence behind that physicality, which is actually the reason why that kind of movement is happening in the first place. And if we don't do that, then it's almost like putting a Band-Aid on a on a cut, right? Without actually looking at and thinking about the reasoning behind that kind of othering. I mean, of course, there is the historical, which we tend to talk about. There's the economic, there's the political. But it is much more important to think about both in the individual sense and as a group, as a community, in terms of the psychology on the ontological, sort of the abstract spaces that lead to that kind of othering that we literally are seeing. Like, this is almost like, pre-World War I and II sort of situation we are seeming to find itself, and especially this year. Like I said, this year is the year of elections. And so what comes out of these elections, in not just here, but this is a global world of elections, right? What comes out of US, out of UK, out of, a myriad of different countries, right, is going to define how the next few decades are going to be. And I think that's why these conversations are extremely important. And, unfortunately, I know in the humanities, we're just getting sidelined more and more, even with the next.
That is why when you are talking about this, the connections with the environment and everything as well, that is why I talked about the quantum physics, bringing the quantum reality, and it's not only the othering is happening in a individualistically or atomistically. The entire realm is in flux, and that is it's not only a particular geography, it's particularly topology or topography that is affected. It's like the entire framework has this tremendous damage effect, like and what it's not only we can't even put a bandage, right? Because it's not a simple cut. It's like carbuncle. The entire it's blasting from within. It's like a volcano that is trying to erupt from within our skin. And that is where I got very interestingly the idea of Sufia Zenobi becoming Kali is not a biological change. She is not biologically getting changed. She is a woman, and she will always be the woman. She was an handicap. She was oppressed. She was beaten by her father because she is very soft-spoken. She was ill-treated by her husband. He literally sedated her to keep, my wife is not fit to come before the masculine gaze. So he kept him sedated. So what happens is that when you sedate individuals, it becomes collective. The collective consciousnness that you have been speaking about is brilliantly is found here, because this is a collective, chaos that comes out. This Sufia Zenobi becoming Kali is not an individual. She is no longer an individual. And otherwise, it could have been a very anti-religious text, like satanic verses being banned. And imagine Rushdie getting shot. Very, very recently he's shot. So he's a very relevant man. And if he would have been shot when he wrote satanic verses, then I wouldn't have had a problem. Okay, fine. He wrote about Quran. He called it satanic verses. He was shot. But just imagine the animosity that underlines after so many years, after that man has gone through so many levels of changes, he is still shot. Can you imagine the amount of animosity? And and that is why this text, I said that this is not a simply religious text. You could have just said that he is just, trashing Islam. No, he's not just trashing Islam. He's trashing the idea of militarism, the Saracen Puritanism, the very Talibanistic instinct, that led to the 9/11. There's something that, after USA removed their armies from Afghanistan, it just went back. It just went back to the same, hellhole, quote, the same hellhole. So what happened with Guantanamo Bay detention camp? What happened with all these, repression, oppression? Nothing has changed. Psychologically, nothing has changed. We had not been able to improve on humanity per se. Even the environment has disastrously gone down. So, people died in millions, over the world, not only in Afghanistan, not only in Iraq, not only in Ukraine, not only in Palestine, not only in Israel. People are dying. Nonetheless, people don't care. This sympathos instead of sympathy. We should get that pathological sentiment into it. We shouldn't go into this medical humanities that after pandemic, we have all understood what is to die. So we should understand it at the retrospect before killing people, that, we are all dead, basically, today or tomorrow. It's not again a religious connotation that we will die someday, to dust thou art and to dust thou shall be. Of course it is so. But the very idea that pandemic taught us is the medical humanities, that how this entire world is disease, the virus, and we are increasing the religious virus, we are increasing the virus of the other through appetite, unsaid appetite, of course, but it's not appetite nonetheless. And the skin color, the something which is simply a melanin content, has become such an issue that has a simple biological phenomena of a melanin content has continued to become such a racial issue globally. And what we see in people getting burnt in France because they are white is just another side of it. Like it's like they have burned us, now we are going to burn it. It's as if the humanity in itself is already dead and buried.
Yeah, majoritism is increasing. Go ahead. Sorry. We'll keep talking otherwise. Go ahead.
I had a question with sir that how will he talk about post-human and transhuman part? How would he explain, sir, if he can do that? In his talk, he talked about transhuman and post-human, right? So yeah. How do you differentiate both this trans part and
okay. I think I will jump in. Yeah, I will jump in at the moment because my question also belongs to that particular category. Is there where you very interestingly bring in a point of Kali is not cybernetics. Nothing is happening to her body. Nothing's the genomic blueprint is not changing. But what we are studying here in the post-human sciences, and it's a lot to do with there's going to be a genetic transformation. There's going to be a lot about your AI changing, robotics coming into place, and how does the mind tackle between the both? if you can speak a little bit about that.
Definitely. This is something which I've been working for last 10 years. It's one of the area that I have been experimenting with. Like, it is very difficult to always look at binaries. Like, from Descartes onward, we have always thought about binaries, right? Mind, body, they are different. Machine, creativity, they're different. They're opposites. Sex, love, and spirituality, they're opposites. The problem with creating opposites is that at the end of the day, the binary code of 0 and 1 does not really work when it is human. Now, when we are calling about this algebraic equations, right, of a point where this is the point where humanity will stop and this is the point where robots will start. No. What happens is, very, very naturally, what we see that the identity of cybernetic ontology by Catherine Hayles has brilliantly pointed out that there is no such thing as a post-human condition. And posthumanism does not mean the end of humanity. It is continuation of humanity through the algebraic codes, the algorithm. So genetic codes and algorithmic codes together creates this cybernetic ontology. Now, when I'm talking about Kali, what Kali is being shown here is there is no technological involvement. So, outset. When I was writing this, my colleagues were saying, well, Rushdie would have just jumped the gun where you said Kali is a post-human. I said, yeah, fine enough. He can, because he's still alive. He can come and debate. But we know Roland Barthes says the author is dead after he writes. So I would rather have participated in a one-to-one discussion with Rushdie himself and trying to convince that how his Kali is post-human. Now, here, what I talked about as the post-human is like this entire destructive urge, the destructive urge, the self as a dynamite. So, when that human blast, this is very different from suicide bombing, right? Nietzsche's idea of self as a dynamite is very much philosophical, not the idea of going into a territory with bombs in their body and going for the suicide bombing of that we have seen that happened over the years by Hamas and everybody. So instead of going to that particular space of suicide bombing, this Kali is basically the destructive urge that controls the more constructive urges. Like, women have stereotyped as somebody who is going to give birth, and consequently she is the mother. Now, what is if you see the Hindu iconography, all others are mother. Like Durga is a mother, Lakshmi is a mother. They have Saraswati is a mother, because they all share the mother quality. But Kali, for instance, is never called really in that way that because it reflects that idea of termination, the very idea of Shiva doing the Tandava, something who is extremely explosive and is needed to explode a kind of system. So what I try to say is like, she is not going through a genetic mutation. She is not going through robotics, algorithmic mutation, but she is a repressed woman whose the level of that repression has turned her has rather dissolved, not turned, dissolved her human quality. She is no longer the mother. She is no longer that woman who feels feels ontologically the touch of human, rather that she exists in the ontological state. Okay, she almost creating the Kristeva's abject. So by becoming Kristeva's abject, almost like something which produces disgust, horror, and every other sentiments, she's negating the very womb. So it's like she is for the first time in her life, she's taking the control of her womb, of her uterus, and of her body, and thereby she is moving away from the stereotyped concept of a woman or a human into a more dynamic, philosophically dynamic, destructive urge. She has become, and in that way I have tried to say that she is a post-human. And the difference, as ma'am asked about the transhuman and post-human, is also very simple, that when you are transcending humanity through the environment, entering into the beast world, for instance, if you go for the studies of vampires of legend, werewolves, and others, interspecies, breeding in literature, not in reality for a change. But that is where the transhumanism is. But posthumanism is a very real concept, both as a quantum reality and as this reality. Whereas transhuman is something which is completely literal, something that is sci-fi, you can say, something which goes through like almost like Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster. You can go that kind of transhuman, somebody who has outstripped the parabola of human curve in a very Da Vincian sense, in a Renaissance sense, that man is the supreme power. So we are not talking about something which is completely alien. We are not talking about alien technologies, or whether they exist or not, whether the sci-fi that Asimov has written of other planets coming on, and whether brilliantly Marvel Cinematic Universe has expanded its entire role and function in the very transhumanist ideas. So transhuman is very much still a sci-fi, whereas posthuman is very, very real, and we get to see that. And again, another thing is that if you're talking about the disability studies, this post-human elements has taken so much important part that they are no longer prosthetics. That is, they are not just used. They have, they are not. They're simply complementing. They are supplementing certain human functions. But that is not to make hash of it. I'm not asking for a genetic cloning. I'm not asking for it. Nor I am asking for popular capitalist consumptive ideas of posthumanism, where you need sex bots, and it has become so important after Harmony 2.0 is being released by Zelex, where all our desires need to be meted not by another human being, because they are they are also human being. They can deny, say no to you. They cannot always accept what it is. So so create a sex bot who is not just for sex but also for mental peace or something like that. No, Kali is neither of them. Kali is simply something which comes out of repression, and which is a very potentially destructive agent against human idea of creativity, against mothering idea. And she is not even the M other that Lacan talks about. M other, creating anxiety. She is ultimately she is not M other, which Lacan says creates anxiety. It's like a mother, is like a crocodile, and you are always inside the mouth. You never know when it's going to shut. And but that is not. She may be can relate her to this idea of terrible mothers, of Grendel's mother, long back in Beowulf, somebody who is prepared to destroy to create, or create to destroy. She may be somebody who reminds me of Blake's tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. So somebody who represents that chaotic agent, not something which is disciplined, not something which is restricted, not something which is bound.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So, but it's still like an evolution of the human condition.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. It changed, but not the genetic code, but it changed the everything else that is human in it. Like, as a human, you cannot do certain things. Like, as a human, you cannot just feel like, okay, this person is pissing me off and just go and kill that person. No, you can't do that. You have cognitive fallacy about it. You will be always think about how to screw people up without actually getting blamed for it. That's how we are human, right? That's why, brilliantly, Blake has said in one of his plays that, animals kill each other because they do not have rationality, and we kill each other because we have rationality. It's a brilliant paradox that we are here, right? Because of our rationality, we are using beautifully, the Macbeth syndrome, defending ourselves. We did it for the greater good. It's so easy to say, like, we are killing people for greater good. So, Kali is not somebody who's trying to do any good or any bad, for instance. She is beyond good and bad. She's beyond the binaries, and that's where she enters into this realm.
Again, this circles back to the concept of her being pure energy itself. So she's again,
definitely unpolluted, unviolable, pure energy. That that quantum energy. That when you slice an atom, it produces that energy.
Do we call that absolute kind of movement, from binary towards absolute, the absolute?
You can, but I don't know whether Rushdie will be very happy with it, because Rushdie doesn't like anything absolute. Rushdie as a person, I just saw him in many of his interviews. I guess when he came to India, I don't remember whether he have or not, but I haven't met him. But all his interviews, all his writings, I believe, talks about this non-absolutist. So he always actually being in that being in a society which is absolute, and haunted and hunted by it. He's both haunted and hunted by it. And even now, as I said, unlike Taslima Nasreen, with Rushdie, the equation was completely different. With Nasreen, it's more like Sufia Zanobi's condition. And, that is why her journalistic writing are that. But with Rushdie, things are very different. He is a man with a great humanitarian idea. And that humanity helps him to understand the post-humanism so well that he writes it without actually intending to it. Because I haven't have any secondary source that relates, shame with any of the post-humanist ideology. So when I was working, as I said, I was being asked by my colleagues, like, there is nowhere Rushdie says this, there is no secondary source. How can you work on a primary source? And, I says, well, Stephen Hawking did it, so why not? And, we can all create. So, it's not like we have to follow the secondary source to create a research. Research area need not be limited to somebody, because it's limited to this, I cannot do that. We are obviously limited to our secondary source because we in our arts, in our humanities, we do not have the scope that quantum physics would give you, to give more field work. There is a very literal difficulty in finding field work, but definitely, if I could go back in time in 1970s to see why Rushdie was writing about this, it's very clear. You can get a very clear picture of this. Problem was with satanic verses. The problem was with Midnight's Children. They are completely of different package. They were almost like agenda based. Like, I have to go against this. Shame is a novel which is completely talks about a very very considerate. It is not absolute. It's very considerate. Yes, ma'am. what you're asking?
I was telling that this is what I had felt in Jain philosophy. So if you look to the philosophy of Lord Mahavir, he is nowhere talking about absolutism. He's talking always about anikantvad, non-absolutism. So this idea of non-absolutism is something which I found when you were discussing this thing. And we have to really look for best non-absolutistic model. That is where we can.
And that is why I like Mayuri's idea about the class, and where she gave this final diagram where this what we need to do. That Mayuri, can you talk about the last model that you have just given a little more?
You mean about the specific, specific pedagogical exercises?
Yes. What we
Yeah.
need, I felt that is very important, because that is what the students need to do and learn, and even us.
Yes, we have
our students are going to become us in a few years, So
they already are. Some of them, when I see them now, they feel that they are older than me.
Well, mine are older than me. So, but the thing is, it's interesting. I just on a sidebar with what you're saying, Debajyoti, what you were saying in terms of Kali and the creative versus the destructive energy, I think is so very relevant to the discussions about fertility that are going on across the world in a very sort of literal sense, if you put it that way. Right? But what we are going to see, what you are describing in an ontological theoretical sense, is the consequence that we are going to see in the physical sense. And I think it is coming in multiple ways. It has already started coming, and I think it is going to get much more sort of acerbic as we go on. And that's why I think, again, what you were saying about we need to find a model that is non-absolute, because we are heading so headlong into every kind of absolutism that is there, which, given our last decade, our experiences with what happens when absolute comes, it really is mind-blowing that we are going that same way such rapidly. But yes, I mean, that is the whole sort of basis of kind of what I'm talking about, using the tools that we have within the classroom, because really that's the only control space we have. So all of the sort of pedagogical strategies that I mentioned, whether it is perspective taking, whether it's role playing, whether it's mirroring or projection, all of these are based in such a way that you encourage your student to think about what it is like to be the other. Right? Because unless they can, to a certain extent, walk in the shoes of the other, they're never going to understand what someone else is going through, especially, like I said, if they're far away. So, it's happening in Israel. What do I care? It ain't me. Right? Or if it is someone who's like not familiar with them, like, what do I know about what's happening with the Palestinians? Like, I mean, I see some of them even don't even know what's happening there, or alternatively, if there's within a lot of my students are very sort of fundamentalist Christians. And so they have been told constantly a certain ideological narrative about the Israel-Palestine war. And so they have very specific belief systems about what is happening there. And it's very difficult to actually shift that, like I was saying. And a lot of pedagogy actually deals or sort of focuses on the idea that if we just keep giving our students more information, they'll change. And that is actually not true. No amount of information you give a student is actually going to make them change how they feel about someone, right? And most of pedagogy tends to say that keep exposing them to different kinds of things, keep exposing them. It'll stick, right? It'll stick at some point. It does not stick, because at the end of the day, this is about their own self-identity. It's about who they think they are. And if I start accepting what this other person is going through, then who am I, right? So that's why it is important to think in terms of schemas, is what I was saying, prototypes, imaging, all of that stuff. Because what we are doing is something greater than just providing information. right? And so these exercises, so generally what I tend to do is like a two-part thing. So a little bit of a leading question, like who is the character in the novel that you identify with the least, right? And then it's like, okay, that's fine. Now let's walk through this. Why do you not identify with this person? But I think it's even more in sort of effective if you can get them to walk through the actions of the other. Why did this person do this thing that you don't like?
Yes.
Right? There's always a reason of why someone behaved a certain way, right? And when you kind of help them trace that out, and if that becomes practice, that is actually helpful in their real life, because then they're getting into this practice of thinking, to why did this person act this way, whether against me or against that person. And that kind of actually leads, it's strangely, because people tend to react in ways that are quite universal, right? So if someone hits me, like, I'm going to feel a certain way, or if you see a birth, everyone on the planet is going to feel okay, let me not generalize, but generally, right? They're going to be happy, but it might be also like you're in a refugee camp. You cannot afford to have a child, right? Yeah. So that birth, even if it is joyous, is also fraught with a lot of conflicting emotions about how am I going to take care of this child, right? Everyone will understand that there are certain situations in life where it might be a joyous situation, but because of what's going on around you, on which you might not have any control, it makes that joyous situation something that you cannot actually sort of fully experience. And it might be that you don't know what it's like being in a refugee camp, but you might have family, or you might be, say, a minor, and your parents are making decisions for you that you don't agree with, and you kind of feel that same sort of, I don't have control over the external situations kind of feeling. So I think it is important to do these exercises just so that in certain ways, we are not just exposing our students to more data, but also forcing them to think in a way that might be different than what they are trained to do, because this is a training as well. They've been trained to think this way.
This reminds me of, a lot of what you're talking is actually what happens in the therapy room, right? I am a therapist myself, actually, and we use these these social constructivist approaches and the one of the most I think the most famously used, and it's developing more and more and trying to sort of go away from the clinical paradigm, is actually the narrative therapeutic work, because it's a lot about what are the stories that we're telling ourselves. A lot of psychotherapeutic issues and interpersonal issues, and not just, I'm not talking about the clinical sense here, but also about, the interpersonal problems, a little bit of like, and not understanding. And so, and actually I was actually working with a project. I don't know if you've heard about Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So that's where I did my master's from. And there's a very beautiful field action project called Simha, run by the faculty there. I think Dr. Duggal, Chetna Duggal. And that's exactly where they are trying to, sort of intervene directly, that they're making it mandatory for kids to sort of, have certain hours of therapy, or just and including these experiential learnings, which are not information based, like you were talking about, Mayuri, where they are very there are different parts of the brain which are activated, which you can't just write down on the whiteboard. And sorry to say, the value education classes that we were undergoing, and it was just read this book. That's it.
Yep.
Nobody taught me that, and the education system did not take care of these things. It was only like my environment in India, which was like studying in like metro cities where there are people from different cultures, and that made me feel a little more comfortable with diversity, honestly speaking. And there was a very interesting question there was a very interesting point in the presentation, Mayuri, where you said that people from the third world country who are already exposed to a certain kind of diversity have a much larger tolerance. And you can just talk a little bit on that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, and this is a basic thing, the more we are exposed to something, the more familiar it becomes. Right? Even if, talking about clinical psychology, because my research is very much based in cognitive psychology.
Yep.
So, if someone is being abused from birth, that is what they're used to. So certain behaviors they don't even notice as something unnatural or untoward because they've always seen that and they see that as the norm. Like this is the normal way to behave. So I have students who say, if my boyfriend doesn't hit me, he doesn't love me. Because a man's got to hit to show his love. Otherwise, he doesn't care. Right?
50 Shades of Grey.
Huh?
50 Shades of Grey. People coming into the
exactly. Right? That, let's not get into that because I have thoughts on that movie.
Not the movie, the book. The movie was the trash. The book.
No, but that's what the students see.
Concept.
See, our students don't actually read the text. They read the movie and so they go off that, which has been so romanticized in the movie. And so I have thoughts, right? But it's interesting. So it's just, you are socially inducted into thinking certain things are good and bad and therefore normal or abnormal. And the more you are exposed to it, it kind of shifts your perspectives. And therefore, it shifts your enduring model. And then any kind of experience that you have in the future, you kind of judge it against what you know as the normal. Okay, this is normal. So, of course, it's fine. He hit her because that's what men do or, whatever it is. So that's the point I was making. The more you're exposed to something, to a certain extent, you kind of accept that. And that's the negative example I'm giving. The positive is also true. If you are exposed more to diversity, if you're exposed to a non-absolute framework, right? When you are in your education system, through induction, whatever form it is, then that's something that you kind of take as your pinning point to judge all actions and peoples with. And I think that's what I meant, because if you're living in an insular culture or a space, or you are in an insular way of thinking, because you could be in the most cosmopolitan place, but your thinking might be very self-other based.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're thinking, and it might be because of education, and I really honestly, I keep saying this, that what's happening in the world, I see as a failure of education.
Yes.
Because if we had taught the populace at this point how to be critical thinkers and to lead with other thinking, we would not be in the place that we are. And I see this absolutely as a failure of our education systems, right? Because we sort of foregrounded memorization and knowledge-based education and not any kind of critical thinking. But that's a sidebar. But that's I'm passionate about this. But I think that's what I meant, Alpika, is that the more we are kind of encouraged to engage with people who are not similar to us, the more we are forced to break from the enduring model. Because if you've never met someone from, say, Haiti, right? And then you're forced to meet someone, then you don't have a preconceived notion to a certain extent of what that person is. You might think, oh, this person is from the Caribbean or this person is Black, therefore. But in a certain sense, you really don't know, right? So there is a chance that might actually force you to sort of rethink what you know about the other.
And I think there has to be an awareness that you don't know. That itself is a very big awareness, that part of a conscious. because this
And,
culture is very important.
Yeah.
I
And
know.
her speech also reminded me of this very idea when of mimetic contagion of violence. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody is hitting you in a crowd, everybody starts hitting you. So this is also a kind of mimesis, mimesis of violence. Like as it has a positive side, it also has a negative side. Like in a music room, when you are listening to a beautiful music, somebody starts clapping, and then everybody starts clapping, even though it's almost like a mimetic action. It's mirror of the mirror. Similarly, the violence is also has become the mirror of the mirror. So when I see the representational violence, and that is also very contagious. And as she was saying that there's a guy got to hit a girl for being a man. This is also a representational violence, and violence in its relationship with the medical therapy. So this is where I always believe, as you were talking about the therapy part, it also reminded me that how we are relational with this violence, and as it becomes almost therapeutic to sometimes resort to violence. But and once you do it, everybody starts resorting to the violence. And how it has become, instead of Freud's cure to hysteria, where we move from catharsis to Oedipal, here we have we do not purify, but we desanitize our consciousness in this violence that we are in.
Yeah.
And that is where I always felt that we are potentially pathological when it comes to violence. And this is the reason it has gone on increasing, in a mimetic unconscious, the mirror of the mirror. And that is why a newborn smile when you smile at it. When you hold a newborn child, you smile. And this is exactly what she is talking about in the classroom. We need to do in the educational process. We as a teacher, we had to go through this mimesis of smiling, and so that they will also smile in about the other questions. But another point that I felt very good about that the students, the idea of whether you can change their way of thinking, and you cannot, as she said brilliantly, most of it remains fixed. And that is why it reminds me that of a line that Adolf Hitler writes in Mein Kampf. Men repeats history because they don't learn from it. That's one of the biggest issue. Otherwise, you could just if you again going to France, because I've spent so much time in France, so I had a lot of relation with that. So, but in 1526, 24th August, the entire Huguenots were slaughtered by Charles IX in Bartholomew's days, known as famous Bartholomew Massacre. And that has gone on repeating. This violence has gone on repeating in its own self, and, religious violence has gone on and repeating. And because, however much you're trying to say that, Hindus and Muslims are brothers in the classroom, they are actually being taught not like that. And that is why Palestinians and Zionists will always be, in war. There will be always a Hamas to take an advantage of it. Hamas did nothing but take an advantage of a situation. They would not have emerged if, this animosity, ancient animosity between Palestine and Israel wasn't there. If there was this sympathy with the Zionists and the Palestine, both of them were sympathetic about that, they would not have gone to the territoriality. The Jordan is just a river. We forgot that it's just a territory, it's geography. We forgot that Jordan is just a river, and whether it's a Zamzam ka pani or whether it is holy water, it still can be shared. It can the land can be shared, and the very Latourian idea, Bruno Latour says that the intentionality, the distributed intentionality could create this entire shift into from violence to a lesser violence. I won't say a violence-less world. That would be very utopian. That would be completely unbelievable, that we cannot go into a violence-less world. But at least unnecessary violence could have been easily reduced if we would have just sympathos, if we had just sympathy. I'm not asking about even antipathy. I'm not asking even of empathy. I'm not asking even for empathy. Simple